My name is Nina Walsh, and the night my family decided I was worth less than a centerpiece happened at my own graduation dinner. I was 22, sitting at the long table at Rosario's, the Italian restaurant my parents reserved every time they wanted to feel important. I'd just walked across a stage at the Illinois Culinary Institute, diploma in hand, 4 years of early mornings and burned fingers and flour-dusted everything behind me. My mom had organized the dinner, extended family, a few neighbors, my dad's golf buddies, the kind of crowd that claps for milestones they don't fully understand. I was still wearing my dress when my mom waved her wineglass toward me and told the table, with a laugh, that Nina was the one we never really worried about because, honestly, we stopped expecting much. She said it lightly, the way you'd mention the weather. My dad looked up from his breadbasket and added, "She peaked in high school, honey," and 3 people laughed. An uncle adjusted his napkin. My grandmother, the only person at that table who looked at me like she meant it, reached across and put her hand over mine under the tablecloth. Nobody else said anything. Nobody said, "That's not right." Nobody said, "Stop it." They just picked up their forks and moved on. I remember the specific sound of my own breathing over the background noise of that restaurant. Measured. Deliberate. The way you breathe when you've decided not to cry in public. I drove myself home from that dinner because I hadn't let anyone pick me up. I sat in my car in front of my parents' house for 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock. Then I went inside, walked past the graduation banner my sister Brooke had hung in the hallway. She was always good at the decorative things and packed 2 bags. I took my knife roll, my textbooks, and the envelope of cash I'd saved from my weekend job at the bakery on Clement Street. By 2 a.m., I was on the highway north toward Chicago with the windows down and everything I'd worked for in the back seat. For 6 years, I stayed gone. I built something from the ground up, the way people do when there's no safety net and no voice in their head saying, "We believe in you." Chicago was cold and crowded and completely indifferent to who my parents were back in Springfield. Nobody cared that my dad had a hardware store on Main Street or that my mom chaired the church hospitality committee. In Chicago, I was just another culinary school grad, with fast hands and a hunger I couldn't fully explain. I started as a line cook at a breakfast spot in Logan Square that smelled like old butter and ambition. I worked doubles, learned the rhythms of a real kitchen, and saved every extra dollar. I got better. I got faster. I started doing private dinners on weekends. Just word of mouth at first. A friend of a friend needed a chef for a dinner party, then a bridal shower, then a corporate lunch. By 25, I had enough regular clients to justify filing a business license. Walsh & Co. Catering started in my apartment kitchen with 1 borrowed refrigerated van and a portfolio I'd photographed myself. By 26, we had a commercial kitchen space in Pilsen and a waiting list for spring weddings. By 27, I'd hired 3 permanent staff and 2 rotating part-timers. We did fundraising galas and birthday parties and once, memorably, a retirement dinner for a federal judge who told me I should be running a Michelin-starred restaurant. I told her I'd rather run my own company. On Tuesday nights, I volunteered at a youth center, 6 blocks from our kitchen, teaching a cooking class for teenagers who mostly came for the free meal but stayed because, I think, someone was finally treating them like their choices mattered. We did basic knife skills, pantry math, how to cook something real out of whatever the food bank sent that week. A few of them had started asking about culinary programs. I helped 2 of them apply. My life on paper looked like proof that it had worked. But there's something nobody prepares you for when you leave a toxic family and refuse to look back. You carry their voice anyway. I'd be plating a tasting menu for 40 guests, every component perfect, and somewhere under the pride was that small, stubborn sound. "She peaked in high school, honey. You learn to work around it. You don't always learn to turn it off." Everything shifted the fall. I took on a catering contract for a corporate retreat outside Springfield. I hadn't been back to my hometown in years. The contract was good enough that I couldn't say no, a 2-day offsite for a regional insurance company. 60 people. 3 formal meals. I drove down myself to do the site walkthrough. The venue was a renovated farmhouse 12 miles outside the city, close enough that I recognized the highway exits, the water tower, the particular flatness of the sky over central Illinois in October. On the drive back, something made me stop at a diner near the interstate. I sat in a booth with bad coffee and opened my laptop to review load estimates for the event, and my fingers, without me fully deciding, typed in my grandmother's name. My grandmother had died 2 years after I left. I hadn't gone to the funeral. I'd sent flowers and written a letter to my uncle, the one she lived with in her last years. And I'd sat in my Pilsen kitchen at midnight and cried alone in a way I hadn't let myself cry since. She was the one person from that world I genuinely missed. What I found in the public estate records was not what I expected to find. My grandmother had set up a savings account in my name when I started culinary school. I knew about it in a general way. She'd mentioned it once, quietly, the summer before I enrolled. She said, "I put a little something aside for your school. It's for you, Nina. Nobody else." The account had been opened with $18,000 and a beneficiary designation that listed only my name. The account had been closed 11 months after her death. I stared at the screen long enough for my coffee to go cold. Closed, not transferred to me. Closed with a full withdrawal. I dug through the probate documents, which were public record, and found a line item I had to read 3 times. The funds had been redirected at the request of a family member, designated for an urgent family expense. Attached was a transfer authorization signed by my father. I scrolled further until I found the date. The withdrawal happened 6 weeks before my sister Brooke's wedding in Cancun. The destination ceremony that I hadn't been invited to. The one my parents had thrown themselves into planning for 2 years. The one I'd seen photos of on Facebook. White sand, resort chairs, an arch of tropical flowers over a ceremony I'd heard cost more than $30,000. $18,000. My grandmother's savings. My name on the account. My father's signature on the withdrawal. I closed the laptop. Outside the diner window, a truck moved through an intersection, and for a long moment, I just watched it go. The math wasn't complicated. The math had always been there, but now it had documentation. Before I tell you what happened when they finally came back, I want to hear from you. Drop it in the comments. What time is it where you are right now, and what city are you watching from? I want to see how far this reaches. 6 months after that diner, I was back in Chicago, mid-October, standing in our commercial kitchen reviewing a menu for a corporate holiday party when the email arrived. The subject line was just my full name. Nina Walsh. No greeting, no explanation. The sender was an address I didn't recognize, but the signature at the bottom was 5 words I hadn't seen written in years. Love, Mom. The body of the email was short. She'd found my company website. She said things had been difficult. She said there was something important we needed to discuss as a family. She included a phone number with a Springfield area code. I closed the email. I went back to my menu. I told myself I would deal with it later. Later came the next morning as a voicemail on my personal cell from a number I'd deleted years ago but recognized the moment the area code appeared on my screen. It was my dad. His voice was quieter than I remembered, slower, with something uncertain in it that hadn't been there when he was laughing at Rosario's. He said he knew I was busy. He said they were proud of what I'd built, just like that. Proud, as if that word belonged to him in relation to me. Then he said things had gotten hard, and they needed to talk to someone who understood business. I listened to it twice. Then I set my phone face down on the counter and finished my prep work. The knock came 3 days later on a Saturday morning. Hard, not polite. The kind of knocking that already assumes you're going to answer. I was in my apartment in Pilsen, in a flannel shirt and yesterday's ponytail, holding a mug, when the sound came through the door. My friends texted before they came over. My neighbors knocked once and stepped back. This was different. This was practiced urgency. Nina. Her voice came through the door like something I hadn't fully unpacked, dusty and immediately recognizable. I know you're home. Please. Then my dad's voice, lower. Neen. Open up. We drove all the way from Springfield. I set my mug down on the kitchen counter, very carefully, and stood still for a moment. The same stillness I used to practice in kitchens when something went wrong mid-service and panic wasn't an option. Then I walked to the door and opened it. The people standing in my hallway were not the ones I'd been managing in my memory all these years. My dad's hair had gone mostly silver. He was wearing a jacket I didn't recognize, something too formal for a Saturday, like he'd dressed for a job interview. My mom looked smaller. The careful brightness she used to project the committee chair posture, The church-first smile was compressed into something more fragile. Her eyes moved past me into the apartment before she'd said a single word. "Well," she said, "this is cozy." The old reflex moved through me, the urge to apologize for the space, to minimize, to deflect. I let it pass. "What do you need?" I said. My dad cleared his throat. "Can we come in?" It's not a conversation for the hallway. Every instinct I had said close the door. What I actually did was step back, because I was 28, and this was my kitchen and my space, and if something was going to be said, I wanted to be the one standing still while it happened. 10 minutes, I said. They walked in like people who were expecting to be corrected. They sat at my kitchen table, which is small and wooden, and has rings on it from coffee mugs and catering paperwork. My dad looked at the framed chef's license on the wall for a long time. My mom's gaze moved over the cookbooks, the knife block, the corkboard with vendor contacts and event timelines pinned to it. "You've done well for yourself," my mom said. I folded my hands on the table and waited. My dad was the one who laid it out. The hardware store had been struggling since a big box retailer had opened 2 exits up the highway 4 years ago. They'd refinanced once to stay afloat, then again. The second loan was now calling early. He was behind on 3 months of payments. The bank had suggested a restructuring option, but required a co-signer with strong credit and documented income. "Someone stable," he said, looking at me. "Someone whose name on the paperwork would make the numbers work." He said it the way someone says a logical conclusion out loud, like it had already been decided and they were just filling me in. I let the silence sit for a few seconds. "You drove 4 hours to ask me to co-sign a loan for the store," I said. "Your credit is solid," my mom added quickly. "You have a business." The bank said, "If we had a co-signer with your profile, the restructuring goes through. We'd have 18 months to turn things around. That's all we're asking." "And Brooke?" I asked. My mom's expression was shifted by a fraction. "Brooke is dealing with a lot right now. Her and David are going through some things. We're not going to put this on her." "Brooke, who had the destination wedding. The one in Cancun. The one you threw for her 2 years after Grandma died." Neither of them answered. The refrigerator hummed. Outside on the street, someone's music thumped and faded. I opened the folder I'd already pulled from my work bag before I let them in. Old habit. You don't walk into any high-stakes situation without your documentation in order. I set a printed page on the table between us. "I found the estate records," I said. "Grandma opened a savings account in my name when I started school. $18,000. You withdrew the full balance 11 months after she passed. 6 weeks before the Cancun wedding." My mom's face didn't crumble. It went still, which was almost worse. "Those were complicated circumstances," she said. "We had a lot of expenses that year. $18,000 that she specifically designated for me, with my name on the account." My dad rubbed a hand over his jaw. "We intended to pay it back. Things got complicated with the store." "You intended to pay back money from a dead woman's savings account that was designated to me, that I never knew you took," I said. "And the way you're going to pay it back is by asking me to co-sign your debt." "Nina," my mom said, her voice tightening. "We came here because you're family. We came here because we need you. After everything we went through to raise you, the school, the expenses, everything." I held up one hand. "You said at my graduation dinner, in front of your friends and your family, that I was the one you stopped expecting anything from. You said it like a punchline." And everyone laughed, including Dad. "And then you went back to your bread." The silence that followed was a different kind. "We were having a hard year," my mom said quietly. "I know," I said. "You were having a hard year, and I was having a graduation dinner." My dad shifted in his chair. "We're not here to relitigate old arguments." "You're not," I agreed. "You're here because you need something. So let me tell you what I'm willing to do. I'm not going to answer right now. I'm going to make a call and get back to you by end of week." After they left, I stood at my kitchen window for a long time looking at the street below. Then I picked up my phone and called my brother. Daniel and I hadn't spoken regularly in years, a handful of texts, one brief call when my grandmother died. He was 6 years older than me, always the steady one, the one my parents pointed to when they wanted to illustrate what normal looked like. He ran a small accounting firm in Naperville. He answered on the third ring. I told him about the visit, about the loan request, about the estate records. The line went quiet. I know about the money, he said finally. I've known for a long time. He told me he'd been at the house when our parents made the decision, the week of the wedding planning. He said he'd argued with them about it. He said they told him I wouldn't notice, that I was already not speaking to anyone and clearly didn't need the help, that Brooke's wedding was a once-in-a-lifetime event and the family needed to show up for it. He said he'd gone along because back then he still believed that keeping the peace meant something. He was quiet again. They came to me 18 months ago, he said. Different ask. They needed $50,000 to float the store through a slow quarter. I gave them 30. They've paid back none of it. I'm going to the bank with them, I said. I want you there. He didn't hesitate. Tell me when. We met at a diner first, the morning before the bank appointment. Daniel looked like a version of our dad that had learned how to carry himself without the bravado. He slid a folder across the table before he even sat down fully. In it was a copy of the loan agreement from when he'd given them the $30,000, their verbal promise to repay documented in an email chain. Also, a copy of a credit card application from 2 years prior, filed under a joint account that had, accidentally or not, included Daniel's business credit profile without his explicit authorization. He'd caught it before it was approved and closed it out, but he'd kept the paperwork. They play both sides, he said. They always have. You get the blame and Brooke gets the money, and I'm the one who's supposed to be too responsible to make a scene. I set my own folder on the table next to his. The estate records, the withdrawal documentation, the timeline showing the transfer happened 6 weeks before a destination wedding I hadn't been invited to attend. He looked at the papers for a long moment. Then he looked up at me. She would be furious, he said. About Grandma's money. I think she knew what she was doing when she put my name on that account, I said. He nodded slowly. Yeah, I think she did too. The bank meeting was in a conference room that smelled like recycled air and carpet cleaner. A loan officer in a gray blazer sat at the head of the table with a neatly printed packet in front of her. My parents arrived first and were already seated when Daniel and I walked in together. I watched my dad's expression move through surprise and then something more complicated. The loan officer walked through the numbers efficiently. The outstanding balance, the payment history, the terms of the restructuring option. She explained that a co-signer with verified income and creditworthiness would significantly improve the application's viability. Then she turned to me. Miss Walsh, the bank would need your consent and your financial documentation to proceed. This is a legal obligation. If your parents default, the liability transfers to you. Do you understand what you'd be agreeing to? I said yes. Then I opened my folder. Before I give you my answer, I said, I want to make sure we're all working with the same information. I placed the estate document on the table first. I explained, in the clearest terms I could, what it was. My grandmother's savings account, my name on the beneficiary designation, my father's signature on the withdrawal authorization. 11 months after her death. My mom started to speak. I kept going. I have 6 years of my own financial records, I said. 6 years of tax returns, business filings, and loan documents, all in my name, all built without $1 of family support. What I do not have is the $18,000 that was designated to me by my grandmother and redirected without my knowledge. I set the second document down. My brother has records of a $30,000 informal loan he extended 18 months ago that has not been repaid. Daniel set his own folder down without speaking. The loan officer glanced between us. My dad's jaw tightened. You came here to humiliate us. I came here because you asked me to, I said. You wanted a cosigner. You wanted someone with a solid credit profile to tie themselves legally to your debt. That requires full information. This is the information. The loan officer cleared her throat carefully. She was professional enough not to editorialize, but I saw her eyes move across the estate document twice. My mom's voice came out lower than her usual register. Nina, if we lose the store, your father loses everything he built. You understand that, don't you? His reputation, his clients, everything he spent 30 years on. We would have to sell the house. Your father's name has been on that storefront since before you were born. You'd let all of that go just to make a point? I looked at her for a long moment. The woman at that table and the woman at the graduation dinner occupied the same face. Both of them believed their discomfort was the most important thing in the room. "You built something for 30 years, I said. And you decided that the way to protect it was to take money from your daughter's inheritance and go into debt you couldn't manage, and then to drive to Chicago and ask that same daughter to absorb the consequences. That's not my failure to fix. That's yours." My dad slammed one open palm on the table, not enough to be dramatic, enough to make the water glasses shift. "After every single thing we gave you," Daniel cut in, quiet and even. "You gave us a story about who we were supposed to be," he said. "Nina was the one you didn't believe in. I was the one who would handle things. Brooke was the one worth celebrating. That's not giving. That's sorting. And we all ended up at this table anyway." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd heard in years. The loan officer set her pen down. "I want to be clear," she said, keeping her voice neutral. "Co-signing is a voluntary decision and cannot be compelled. Miss Walsh, are you prepared to make a decision today?" "I am," I said. "I won't be co-signing." My mom made a sound like something small breaking. "You can't, Nina. After everything. You raised 2 children who sat across from you today and both said no," I said. "That didn't happen because we're ungrateful. It happened because we learned, eventually, that the way this family ran wasn't working for anyone who wasn't the center of it." I gathered my folders. Daniel stood when I did. "I hope you find a way through this," I told my parents, and I meant it. I have spent 6 years working at things that were harder than this. There are financial counselors who specialize in exactly this situation. The loan officer can probably give you a referral. My mom didn't respond. My dad stared at the table. I walked out of that conference room with Daniel beside me, through the lobby, and out the glass doors into a gray November afternoon, and for the first time in a very long time I felt something I didn't have a word for until I was standing on the sidewalk with cold air on my face. It wasn't anger. It wasn't relief. Exactly. It was the particular quiet of a thing that was finished. Here's the part that took months to understand, sitting on the other side of it. I'd spent 6 years believing that leaving was the wound, that the moment I walked away from that house at 22 was the thing that needed to be healed. What I learned in that conference room was that I hadn't been wounded by leaving. I'd been wounded long before, by the years of being told, in small and large and sometimes laughing ways, that my ambitions were cute and my feelings were inconvenient and my future was something the family had given up on. Leaving hadn't broken anything that wasn't already broken. I had just finally believed it. My parents did not recover the store. It closed the following spring. A notice in the Springfield Gazette. The lease terminated. The inventory liquidated. My parents moved into a smaller house on the east side of town. My mom, according to Daniel, cried about it at church. My dad went quiet in the way that some men do when their self-concept loses its scaffolding. He started therapy 6 months later, reluctantly. The kind of reluctant that sometimes becomes something real if the person inside keeps showing up. Daniel kept tabs on them. He told me what he thought I needed to know and left the rest alone. Brooke and I have not spoken directly. That's a different story, and it isn't mine to tell all the way through yet. What I did with the rest of the year, I expanded our catering team, added 2 junior chefs we promoted from our apprentice program, and formalized something I'd been doing informally for a while. I set up a small annual scholarship through the Illinois Culinary Institute. A single award, renewed yearly, for a first-generation student with financial need and documented aptitude. The application asks one question, and it's the question nobody asked me when I needed to hear it. Tell us about someone who believed in you before you believed in yourself. I named it after my grandmother. I don't tell people at events about it, and I don't post about it online. It's not a story for the caption. It's a debt paid back to someone who put my name on an account because she'd seen something in me worth protecting, and I'm choosing to believe that wherever she is, she'd think this was the better use of the money. Here's what I want to leave you with, and I want to say it plainly, without wrapping it in softness that makes it easier to dismiss. Being born into a family does not mean your suffering is the price of admission. People who call you the one we stopped expecting anything from are telling you something true. It's just not true about you. It's true about them. It's true about what they can see, and what they're willing to invest in, and how they've decided to assign value to the people under their roof. You are allowed to leave, You are allowed to build something without their permission or their blessing, or even their acknowledgement. You are allowed to sit across a table with documentation and say, "No, I understand what I'd be agreeing to, and I won't." Setting a boundary is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of accuracy. You are saying, "Here is what I will hold, and here is what I will not." That's not cold, that's honest. And honest, sometimes, is the most loving thing available. If you are someone who grew up being sorted into the category of not quite enough, I want you to hear this from someone who drove away from a graduation dinner with 2 bags and a knife roll and no plan. You do not need their revision to be real. You do not need them to say, "We were wrong about you," before you are allowed to know that you were right about yourself. The buildings don't need your parents' approval to light up. The food doesn't need their endorsement to be beautiful. The scholarship doesn't need their blessing to change someone's life. You are allowed to be exactly what they told you not to bother becoming. If you made it all the way here, I want to know one thing. Leave it in the comments. What's one thing someone told you that you couldn't do, that you went ahead and did anyway? Because your answer might be the thing that keeps someone else going. From where I'm standing, this was never really a story about money or cosigners or hardware stores. It was a story about a woman who got tired of letting her family write her value on paper she didn't sign. She didn't blow anything up. She just stopped agreeing to carry the damage. And when the moment came, she sat down at a table with the evidence of her own worth and let the numbers speak for themselves. If you were in her position, would you have signed the loan? And what would it have cost you to say no?